Darius had worked his whole life to build a quiet corner of peace, a home wrapped in oak trees, and the kind of silence that hums like a well-tuned engine. To him, the upscale neighborhood wasn't about the HOA regulations or the manicured lawns. It was about mornings on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee, and evenings where the loudest sound was the click of a sprinkler head. Life here was supposed to be smooth as a porch swing on a Sunday afternoon. It was a simple kingdom, and he guarded it well, or so he thought. At first, the signs of trouble were subtle. His Wi-Fi, that invisible lifeline, began to stutter and stumble like an old radio fighting through static. Pages loaded slower than molasses in January. Video calls froze on unflattering screens where half his face looked like a Picasso painting. Maybe it was just the weather, Darius thought. Maybe the router was getting tired, like everything else in this modern age. He shrugged it off like a loose floorboard, annoying but nothing to lose sleep over. But when the slowdown started turning everyday tasks into a game of patience, Darius decided it was time to peel back the wallpaper and see what was rotting underneath. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from. And if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. A quick login to his router settings revealed an unfamiliar device quietly sucking down his bandwidth like a mosquito at a backyard BBQ. Some uninvited guest had been living off his connection, freeloading without so much as a thank you. Annoyed but not alarmed, Darius simply changed his password, throwing a few extra symbols in for good measure. He saw it as tightening the drawbridge, a sensible private action to secure his little kingdom. What he didn't realize was that he'd just kicked a hornet's nest straight into a hurricane. The next morning, just as the rich smell of coffee curled through his kitchen, the hurricane arrived in human form. Karen Whitmore didn't knock. She didn't call ahead. She stormed onto his property like a tax collector with a clipboard full of bad news. Perfectly styled blonde hair, sunglasses perched like a tiara atop her head, and a scowl that could turn milk sour. She stopped at the foot of his porch, hands on hips, posture stiff with outrage. "Did you change your Wi-Fi password?" she barked, each word snapping like a mousetrap. Darius, still holding his coffee, blinked at her as if she were an unexpected raccoon wandering into his kitchen. "Yeah. Why?" Karen's face darkened into a color somewhere between beet red and volcanic ash. "Because my internet stopped working. I've been using your connection for months and now I can't do anything." For a long moment, Darius just stared, wondering if this was real life or some surreal dream fueled by too much caffeine. She wasn't apologetic. She wasn't embarrassed. She was mad at him because he dared to reclaim what was his. He raised an eyebrow, his voice steady. "You've been stealing my Wi-Fi?" Karen scoffed like the very concept was beneath her. "It's just the internet. You people always make a big deal out of nothing. It's not like it cost you anything extra." There it was. You people. The phrase hung in the air like a bad smell, thick with the rotten stench of entitlement. Darius took a slow breath, the kind you take when you're trying to keep your hands in your pockets and your words out of trouble. "It's my Wi-Fi. I pay for it. I don't owe you access. Not now, not ever." Karen's mouth twisted into a sneer so fierce it looked like she was trying to eat her own anger. "Oh, I see how it is," she hissed. "You don't belong here. You think you can play games with the people who actually built this neighborhood?" She jabbed a finger in the air, eyes wild. "Fine. I'm calling the police." Before Darius could even register the ridiculousness of it, she whipped out her phone and punched the numbers like she was calling in an airstrike. Standing there on his own porch, he watched her feed lies to the 911 operator as easily as breathing. "There's a suspicious man in my neighborhood," she said, layering on a syrupy panic so thick you could pour it on pancakes. "He's hacking into homes. He's threatening me. I feel so unsafe." It would have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous. Karen wasn't just spinning a tale. She was playing with matches in a room full of gasoline, betting that the spark would burn Darius instead of her. But Darius didn't panic. He didn't yell. He didn't stomp or throw his coffee at the wall. Instead, he leaned back against the porch post and crossed his arms. watching her perform like an actress auditioning for the role of victim number one. If Karen thought she could spin her web and catch him like a fly, she had no idea what was coming. Because what she didn't know, what she couldn't even imagine, was that the internet she had so greedily stolen wasn't just a pipe for stolen Wi-Fi. It was a tunnel, a trail, a breadcrumb path leading straight back to her own dark deeds. While she dialed and lied and smiled with the confidence of someone who always believed she'd be believed, Darius was already preparing the kind of quiet, devastating revenge that doesn't come with yelling or fists, but with facts, cold and sharp as a winter gust. The sirens were already slicing through the morning calm, painting the sky with urgency, and Darius, coffee in hand, waiting on his porch like a king defending his castle, was ready to meet them. The police hadn't even stepped out of their cruiser before Karen began waving her arms, pointing dramatically at Darius like she was identifying a criminal on the run. Her voice rose to a shrill crescendo as she rattled off accusations faster than a bad magician pulling rabbits out of hats. Darius stayed still, leaning against the porch post, coffee cooling slightly in his hand. The officers, Officer Jordan and Officer Miller, approached slowly, their faces unreadable. But before Darius could open his mouth to explain, he already knew. Karen thought this would be a slam dunk. She thought her performance would seal his fate. What she didn't realize was that the real show was about to start. And she was the star. After explaining his side to the officers and inviting them into his home, Darius moved with the calm efficiency of a surgeon preparing for an operation. He sat down at his desk, plugged a USB drive into his computer, and opened the folder that was about to turn Karen's whole world inside out. Officer Jordan and Officer Miller leaned over slightly as the screen flickered to life, revealing the router logs Darius had captured. It started innocently enough. Normal browsing history, some harmless shopping sites, a few news articles. But then the path darkened like a trail leading into a forbidden forest. First came the extremist forums, cesspools of hate where anonymous cowards spewed venom like broken fire hydrants. Darius scrolled, letting the words speak for themselves. Messages laced with racism, conspiracy theories that read like the fever dreams of a paranoid raccoon, threats aimed at strangers she had never even met. Karen, it seemed, wasn't just a neighborhood busybody. She was moonlighting as a keyboard crusader, wielding anonymous usernames like digital daggers. Officer Jordan's jaw tightened as he read. Officer Miller let out a low whistle that cut the silence like a blade. Darius paused, giving them a moment to digest the bile Karen had been pouring into the world before clicking to the next section. One, even darker. Fraudulent transactions, online scams run through shady marketplaces, stolen credit card numbers routed through VPN tunnels like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Karen wasn't just racist, she was running operations that would make a street hustler blush. The officers exchanged a glance, the kind of look that says without words, "This is much bigger than we thought." Darius leaned back in his chair, letting the gravity settle in the room like thick fog, and then he opened the final folder, the one that turned stomachs. One login attempt, flagged red by the router's security system, to a site so vile it needed no further explanation. Officer Jordan straightened up sharply. Officer Miller's eyes narrowed, no words were spoken, none were needed. A different kind of tension filled the air, heavy and serious. Karen, still standing in the doorway, clutching her purse like it might shield her from reality, sputtered, "That's not mine, he's making this up. He's the hacker. I told you he was dangerous." Her voice cracked on the last word, desperation bleeding through her shrill performance. But Darius didn't even turn to look at her. He clicked one final window open, showing the IP addresses. The smoking gun. "Everything on this log," he said coolly, "happened under my network, and all of it traces back to her device." It was like watching a dam crack under pressure. Karen's bravado, so blinding just moments ago, flickered and faltered. She looked at the officers, pleading now, trying to find purchase on ground that was crumbling beneath her expensive shoes. But Officer Jordan had already stepped back, arms crossed, face cold. Officer Miller quietly clicked his pen, jotting something down with the kind of slow finality usually reserved for writing obituaries. Darius let the silence stretch a moment longer, savoring the rare satisfaction of a bully cornered by nothing more than facts and patience. He could feel it, the tide turning, the weight shifting, the invisible courtroom of neighborly opinion leaning in his favor, and all it had taken was a changed password and the ability to keep calm when every instinct screamed to shout. Officer Jordan finally broke the silence, voice low but firm. "Miss Whitmore," he said, no longer calling her Karen, no longer giving her the privilege of first names, "you need to come with us for questioning." Karen gasped, a sound so dramatic it might have earned applause in a cheaper venue. "No! This isn't fair! He's setting me up! You can't believe him over me!" she shrieked. Officer Miller sighed, the sound long and tired, like a man who had seen one too many late-night reality shows played out on suburban lawns. "Ma'am," he said, "right now, what we believe is evidence." And just like that, the first crack in her kingdom turned into a landslide. As the officers moved to escort her, Karen made one final desperate gambit. She lunged at Darius, nails flashing like talons, a mad shriek tearing from her throat. But before she could even touch him, Officer Miller caught her wrist mid-air and twisted her arms behind her back with the ease of a man wrangling a yapping dog. Karen kicked, screamed, cursed, but it was over. For the first time, the neighbors began to trickle out from behind curtains and hedges. Phones were raised, videos began recording. Karen, who once ruled the street with clip notes about garbage bins and lawn heights, was now center stage in the drama of her own collapse. Darius stood there, steady as a lighthouse against the storm, sipping his cold coffee as sirens sang their justice song. What Karen had failed to realize, what people like her never do, is that when you build your castle out of lies and entitlement, it only takes one truth, one calm, unmovable truth, to make the whole rotten thing come crashing down. And as Officer Jordan led her toward the cruiser, the neighborhood watched with wide eyes and a few barely concealed smirks, as Queen Karen's reign ended not with a bang, but with a shriek and the click of handcuffs. There's something downright magical about watching a plan backfire in real time, and as Karen Whitmore flailed against a pair of very unimpressed police officers, Darius had to admit, it was better than television. Reality shows couldn't touch the absurdity unfolding on his front lawn. No scriptwriter alive could dream up a woman who called the cops on herself and then got arrested while claiming to be the true victim. If Karma had a theme song, it would have been playing at full blast in the background. The cruiser door slammed shut behind Karen with a satisfying thunk, cutting off her latest screech mid-syllable. Officer Jordan and Officer Miller shared a look, the kind you only exchange after seeing something so ridiculous you needed silent confirmation that yes, this was in fact happening. Darius simply leaned against his porch, arms crossed, sipping what was left of his lukewarm coffee. He felt no rush. The day had decided to entertain him, and he wasn't about to miss the grand finale. But the show wasn't over yet. Karen, not one to give up easily, was still trying to wriggle out of her own mess with the energy of a raccoon caught in a trash can. "You don't understand," she wailed, kicking weakly against the cruiser door. "He's dangerous. He's hacking the whole neighborhood. He's probably spying on our kids." She threw out accusations like spaghetti at a wall, hoping something would stick. Officer Miller, who clearly had the patience of a saint or a man deeply regretting his career choices, just shook his head. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "your biggest crime today is murdering common sense." That line nearly made Darius snort coffee out of his nose. He quickly looked away, pretending to study the rose bushes, but inside, he was howling. Once Karen was secured in the back seat, Officer Jordan turned back toward Darius, professionalism still stitched tight across his face, but the corners of his mouth twitched. "We'll need a full statement," he said, "but first, would you mind showing us a little more of what you found?" Darius nodded and led them back inside, moving with the steady ease of a man who knew the truth was his armor. Karen's wild accusations might have been loud, but evidence? Evidence hummed louder. Inside the living room, Darius sat back down at his desk and opened the USB drive again. Officer Jordan and Officer Miller hovered nearby, peering over his shoulder like seasoned detectives, ready for the next clue in a mystery that had gone from suburban squabble to federal-level mess in under 30 minutes. Darius clicked through the folders one by one, each revelation worse than the last. Messages brimming with hate, transactions routed through burner sites, flagged connections to sites no decent human would ever touch. It painted a picture of Karen not as a meddling neighbor, but as a full-blown disaster with Wi-Fi access. Officer Miller muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like, "Holy crap," but no one corrected him. Officer Jordan's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the timestamps, the locations, the cold digital trail that Karen had so stupidly left behind. "She thought she could blame you," Jordan finally said, voice low and even. "And meanwhile, she left footprints through a swamp of her own making." Darius shrugged, his mouth twitching at the corners. "I guess when you're used to getting away with things, you stop wiping your feet at the door." Officer Miller actually chuckled at that, a dry, humorless sound. "She didn't even try to hide it. This is like watching someone rob a bank and leave their driver's license at the counter." The tension in the room thinned slightly, replaced by the shared absurdity of what they were seeing. But it wasn't funny for long, because crimes like these didn't just vanish with a slap on the wrist. Karen wasn't facing a warning note tucked under her windshield. She was staring down charges that could stack up taller than her homeowners association bylaws. Officer Jordan straightened, fixing Darius with a level gaze. "This is serious, real serious. We'll need to involve our cybercrime division to sort through the worst of it. But between the identity theft, the fraud, and everything else, it's not just you who's been affected." Darius nodded, feeling a mix of grim satisfaction and a twinge of sadness. For all the yelling, the fake tears, and the furious entitlement, Karen had been the architect of her own downfall, and she built it faster than anyone could have predicted. Outside, more neighbors were gathering. Phones were out, whispers were running like wildfire. In a matter of hours, half the county would know what had gone down at 314 Willow Bend Lane. Some already did. Darius spotted Rick 2 houses down, pretending to weed his garden while holding his phone suspiciously upright. Inside, Officer Jordan's radio crackled to life, dispatch confirming that backup units were en route. They weren't just hauling Karen away for show. They were about to start peeling back every layer of her deception, like an onion made entirely of lawsuits. Darius sat back, letting the moment wash over him. Karen had believed she could twist reality by being the loudest voice in the room, but she'd underestimated the quiet weight of facts. Facts didn't shout. They didn't wave their arms or stomp their feet. Facts just stood there, silent and unshakable, until the whole flimsy structure of lies collapsed under its own rotten weight. As Officer Jordan headed outside to brief the incoming units, Officer Miller lingered for a second longer. He gave Darius a nod, one part respect, one part weary understanding. "You handled this better than a lot of folks would have," he said. Darius gave a small, almost amused smile. "You learn to pick your battles." Miller smirked back. "Well, today you picked the winning side." And as the squad cars filled the street and Karen's shrieks faded into the hot summer air, Darius thought to himself, not for the first time, that maybe sometimes, just maybe, the universe really did know how to balance its own books. You just had to stay patient enough to let it. If there was ever a moment when Karen Whitmore realized she wasn't the hero of her own story, it was when the backup cruisers rolled into the neighborhood like the opening act of a circus she didn't want a headline. And there she was, sitting in the backseat of a patrol car, thrashing like a salmon on dry land, still hollering about rights and injustice, while the rest of the street treated the whole thing like free entertainment. Kids rode by on bikes, pretending not to stare. Rick down the block had upgraded from fake weeding to setting up a lawn chair and cracking open a soda. Inside the house, Darius watched calmly from the window, sipping a fresh cup of coffee, the heat rising off the mug like smoke from a battlefield he no longer had to fight on. Officer Jordan was coordinating with the cybercrime unit, his radio spitting out short bursts of codes and confirmations. Officer Miller flipped through the files Darius had provided, his pen scribbling notes faster than a court reporter at a juicy trial. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no. If she was going down, she was determined to go down swinging and whining. She demanded to speak to a supervisor, demanded a full investigation, demanded someone bring her bottled water with no fluoride because it's poison, you know. And when that didn't work, she did the one thing guaranteed to make everything worse. She lunged. Like a soap opera villain who missed her cue, Karen burst from the patrol car with a shriek that made two birds take off from a nearby tree. Officer Miller caught her mid-leap, spinning her around and pressing her against the cruiser with the ease of a man handling a cranky toddler in a restaurant. "That's assault, ma'am," he said flatly, as if reading off a grocery list. On top of cybercrime, fraud, and impersonation of victimhood, Karen kicked at the air, screeching, "I'm the one being attacked! He hacked me! He hacked all of us! He hacked the American dream!" If it hadn't been so tragically absurd, it might have been inspiring. Somewhere, a bald eagle probably shed a single tear. Darius leaned against the porch rail, watching the meltdown unfold like a man watching a house of cards topple, one smug layer at a time. It was almost art. Karen had spent years weaponizing her privilege like a shield, convinced that volume and outrage could rewrite facts. But now, her empire of noise was collapsing under the quiet weight of truth. Officer Jordan approached her again, this time with a pair of handcuffs that gleamed in the sunlight like a symbol of poetic justice. "Karen Whitmore," he said, voice calm, "you are under arrest for assaulting an officer, cyber fraud, and obstruction of an investigation. You have the right to remain silent." He barely got through the second line before Karen screamed again, her voice cracking like a dropped plate. "No, you can't. I'm a white woman. You can't do this to me," she shrieked. The neighborhood collectively held its breath. Even the squirrels froze, tiny paws halfway to their mouths. Darius watched as Officer Jordan didn't even blink. He simply reached for his radio, calling in the transportation unit like it was just another day at the office. Officer Miller tightened the cuffs as Karen continued thrashing, desperate, frantic, the reality finally sinking through the thick, entitled armor she had worn her whole life. But Karen wasn't finished making a fool of herself. In a last, glorious act of self-destruction, she turned to Officer Jordan with pure venom in her eyes and spat directly in his face. The world seemed to stop. It was as if the entire block, the entire town, maybe the entire country, collectively sucked in a sharp breath. Darius felt his heart clench, not in fear, but in absolute, stunned disbelief. Officer Jordan stood motionless for a second, the spit glistening on his cheek like a final insult hurled at the very concept of decency. Slowly, methodically, he wiped his face with a handkerchief, folded it neatly, and tucked it away. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence was heavier than 1,000 lectures. Officer Miller's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with something that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't forgiveness either. Karen, oblivious to the hole she had just dug straight into the center of the earth, kept screaming about injustice, about rights, about how her taxes paid for everything and she deserved respect. Meanwhile, Officer Jordan clicked the cuffs tighter and leaned in close enough that only Darius, from his spot on the porch, could hear. "Congratulations," he said, voice low and icy. "You just turned a bad day into a career-ending decision." The transportation unit arrived minutes later. Karen was loaded into a second cruiser, still screaming, still convinced that sheer volume could bend reality to her will. The doors slammed, the cruisers pulled away, the dust settled, and the neighborhood, good, decent people who had quietly suffered under Karen's reign of pettiness, began to breathe again. Rick raised his soda can in a mock salute. "Long live the Wi-Fi king!" he called out, earning a ripple of laughter from the small crowd gathering on the sidewalk. Darius just smiled and nodded once, the satisfaction warm and steady inside him. He hadn't needed to shout. He hadn't needed to rage. All he had needed was the truth, the patience to hold it steady, and a little faith that sooner or later, Fools set their own traps. Karen had built herself a golden cage of lies. All Darius did was change the lock. By sunrise the next morning, Karen Whitmore was famous, and not in the way she always imagined. No, she didn't land on a magazine cover or snag an invite to a charity gala. She went viral for all the wrong reasons. The internet devouring her meltdown like a pack of wolves finding a porterhouse steak. It started with one nosy neighbor posting footage of the whole fiasco, Karen's shrieking, the spit heard around the world, the glorious snap of handcuffs. From there, it spread like wildfire. Entitled Ocho Karen arrested after attacking black neighbor over Wi-Fi. Read one headline. Suburban showdown ends in viral disaster, said another. Overnight, Karen's name trended alongside memes of her snarling face, captioned with gems like, password, protected, Karen, not. Rick, never one to miss an opportunity, threw together a montage of the event set to Another One Bites the Dust and posted it to Facebook. It hit 100,000 views before lunchtime. Local news vans lined the street by noon, interviewing neighbors who all, amazingly, had no trouble finding words to describe Karen's reign of terror. Some smiled politely on camera, others unleashed years of pent-up frustrations. One woman held up a sign that said, "Free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free of Karen." Darius sat on his porch through it all, coffee in one hand, phone buzzing non-stop in the other. Messages from old friends, new acquaintances, strangers he'd never met, all congratulating him for what the internet was already calling the Great Password Uprising. One text from his buddy simply read, "Bro, you're a legend." But the real fireworks happened that evening during an emergency HOA meeting hastily called in the clubhouse. The same clubhouse where Karen had once hosted endless, soul-sucking sessions about trash bins, lawn heights, and acceptable mailbox colors. The irony was delicious enough to bottle and sell. The board members filed in looking like prisoners of war, heads low, shoulders tense. But something was different now. The spell Karen had cast over them was broken. Her power had vanished, crumbled like a stale cookie under the weight of her own arrogance. No more side glances of fear, no more whispered alliances. Just resignation, and in a few faces, relief. Rick live-streamed the meeting for anyone who couldn't get a seat, panning over the crowd like a proud journalist covering the fall of a dictator. The HOA president, a meek, sunburned man named Gordon, who Karen used to boss around like a badly trained golden retriever, stood up and cleared his throat. His voice trembled slightly as he read the motion to ban Karen Whitmore permanently from the community association, citing conduct unbecoming, harassment, fraud, and creating a hostile environment not aligned with community values. The vote was unanimous. No speeches, no drama, just one clean, devastating sweep. Rick whooped from the back row, someone else clapped, a few others joined in. Before long, the entire room was standing, applauding not just the decision but the fact that, for the first time in years, they weren't living under the thumb of a suburban tyrant. Outside, the fallout hit Karen harder than a freight train. Her house, once a symbol of her self-importance, became a financial anchor around her neck. Legal fees piled up faster than snow in a blizzard. Lawsuits loomed. Her HOA privileges, gone. Her reputation, shredded. Mortgage payments missed. Within weeks, foreclosure signs blossomed like weeds in her manicured front lawn. The same lawn she had fined other people for daring to let dandelions grow. The bitter irony wasn't lost on anyone. Meanwhile, Darius thrived. His porch, once a front-row seat to madness, became a sanctuary again. He planted new flowers, hosted weekend barbecues where the only rule was bring your own chair and mind your own business. His Wi-Fi ran smoother than ever, untouched by leeches or lawsuits. He even changed his network name to Karen Free Zone just for the chuckles. One evening, as the sun set and the air cooled to that perfect sleepy hume, Darius's phone buzzed again. It was Rick, sending a meme. It showed a castle wall with a single gate, labeled Wi-Fi. and a cartoon Karen standing outside in medieval clothes, screaming, "Let me in!" The caption read, "And thus the great firewall of Darius was born." Darius laughed out loud, a deep, satisfied sound that rolled out over the porch. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded behind his head, eyes half closed in the golden glow of sunset. Peace, real peace, tasted sweeter after a battle you never asked for but absolutely won. In the neighborhood group chat, which Karen had once ruled with an iron fist, people now shared jokes, recipes, and invites to casual block parties. Without fear, without fines, without the constant thud of Karen's metaphorical gavel slamming down on everything, from kids' chalk drawings to garden gnomes. It wasn't just a better neighborhood, it was a freer one. And Darius, the accidental hero of a suburban rebellion, finally had what he'd been chasing all along, a simple life, surrounded by good people, with strong coffee, a fast Wi-Fi connection, and absolutely no Karens on the horizon. Some battles, Darius thought as he watched kids riding bikes down the street without a care in the world, are worth fighting, even if you never wanted to pick up a sword. Especially when the only sword you needed was the truth and a halfway decent password. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't march down the street waving a flag or announce itself with fireworks. True peace slips in quietly, like a cool breeze on a hot day, and you don't even realize how much you missed it until it settles around you. That's exactly what Darius felt in the weeks that followed Karen Whitmore's spectacular implosion. Gone were the shrill emails, the clipboard patrols, the threats over garden decorations and holiday lights. In their place, porch swings creaked lazily, kids scribbled chalk drawings across sidewalks without fear of fines. Neighbors, once wary and tight-lipped, now lingered at each other's driveways chatting about nothing important at all, the way a real community should. The HOA, once a weapon in Karen's hands, was reborn. New leadership came in like a fresh coat of paint over a cracked wall. Rules were simplified, meetings became potlucks instead of courtroom dramas. People laughed more, worried less. If a lawn got a little wild, well, that was between a man and his mower, and nobody else's business. Darius didn't try to be a leader in any of it. He didn't hang banners or run for HOA president. He didn't need to. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who quietly stand their ground when it matters most, letting actions ripple out farther than any speech ever could. One afternoon, as Darius tended to his garden, he noticed a small crowd gathering by his mailbox. Curious, he wandered over, wiping dirt from his hands. There, newly bolted to the post, was a shiny plaque gleaming in the sun. It read, "In appreciation, defender of peace and Wi-Fi." Rick, trying and failing to suppress a grin, clapped him on the back. "Had to do it, man. You earned it." Darius shook his head, laughing. "I just changed a password." Rick winked. "Yeah, and sometimes that's all it takes to change everything." As the summer rolled on, Darius watched the neighborhood grow stronger, freer, kinder. The gate that Karen had tried to build between people wasn't just gone. It had been replaced with something better. Respect. Trust. The kind of neighborly spirit that couldn't be voted on or fined away. He thought often about how easy it would have been to lose his cool that first day, to scream back, to threaten, to fight fire with fire until the whole block went up in smoke. But instead, he had chosen patience, evidence, calm, and somehow, in doing so, he had turned the tide. Sometimes, Darius mused, the strongest weapon isn't anger. It's a well-timed silence, a steady hand, a locked Wi-Fi network. Karen, of course, had disappeared completely from their lives. Her house, stripped of its banners of power, was eventually bought by a young couple who immediately tore down the ridiculous privacy fences and planted sunflowers instead. Where once there had been fear, there was now laughter and light. Every so often, a tourist or a blogger would drive by to snap a picture of Darius's plaque, the legendary mailbox, and the now infamous Wi-Fi sign he kept updated just for fun, password protected, entitlement rejected. It became a bit of local folklore, a story whispered at block parties and retold at barbecues, with the same wide-eyed reverence reserved for tall tales about lost gold and heroic standoffs. But Darius didn't think of himself as a legend. He thought of himself as a man who just wanted to sit on his porch, drink his coffee, and be left alone. A man who understood that sometimes the biggest battles are fought not with fists, but with quiet dignity. And a little help from a router admin panel. One golden evening, as he settled into his chair with a fresh mug in hand, a group of kids rode by on their bikes. One of them waved and shouted, "Thanks, Mr. Darius." He smiled and tipped his coffee mug in salute. Maybe he hadn't set out to change anything. Maybe he hadn't wanted the spotlight, the news coverage, the viral fame, but somehow, in defending a small thing, his own Wi-Fi, his own peace, he had helped carve out a bigger victory, one that mattered. And as the sun sank low, painting the sky in molten colors, Darius leaned back and listened, not to sirens or angry shouting or accusations, but to the sweet, steady hum of a neighborhood finally, blissfully free. Sometimes, he thought, all it takes to bring down an empire built on arrogance is one man who refuses to bow and one well-chosen password. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.